Hello, and welcome to How to Be a Better DM, a part of Session Zero Studios. My name is Tanner Wayland, and I'm going to help you take one more step on the journey of being the best DM in the world without breaking the bank, burning yourself out, or destroying relationships at the table. And today, I have an interesting topic, but first, I want to actually talk about some questions that, so we have our Discord, the Guild, and we had asked if anybody had questions. And here's some that I just wanted to go through quickly at the start, and then one of them inspired the topic for today. Now, from Lucifem, he asked the question, why are they making male hags when wizards already exist? Now, that's an interesting question. I think in my mind, the distinction between a wizard and witch, if we're going by Harry Potter definitions, right? Wizard, witch, that type of thing, like gender gap, I guess you could say. Hag feels different in D&D in the way that like a hag is an actual kind of almost like witchier witch, a little bit more wicked, a little bit more out there, so to speak. Now, obviously, doesn't have to be evil aligned, but I think that's kind of the idea there. And so maybe by being like, oh, a male hag, where they're kind of creating that now in D&D, instead of just calling it a wizard, I think the distinction is the haggy kind of dissident element there. That may have been a joke question, but I wanted to ask it sincerely. He also asked, will this rash clear up or should I see a doctor? The answer is always yes. I know that's a joke, but if there's any part of you that actually is wondering, go see a doctor. I've lived a lot of my life not going, and now I am, and I feel a lot more responsible for my own health. Now, these next questions, it's from Captain Relic, the Brass Dragon, and this one kind of inspired my topic for today. They were hoping that we could give our thoughts about alignment and why it should be either avoided, discarded, or utilized. And they said specifically, Wizard of the Coast with the 2025 Monsters Manual is going back to assigning good and evil based off skin color with things like elves and dragons, and making things like goblins always evil again, despite their claims that the new core books are setting neutral. Now, Captain Relic, I actually have seen other comments in our Discord where they've been like, man, I'm really frustrated with how Wizards of the Coast kind of presents alignment and how they tie it to kind of stereotypes, right? And you see this with a lot of actual plays right now where people are trying to be more understanding and not be like, hey, all orcs are just one type of orc and they're evil. People are trying to add some depth to it. And that's something that personally I find very interesting. Other people do not, and they kind of like those stereotypical things, right? And you can actually play off of those and have a pretty fun time. But that's a discussion that we're going to have at other times. Just briefly, because Justin and I do want to have a discussion more in depth about alignment and when to use it, when to not use it, and how it can help / hinder a campaign. But for now, my simple thoughts are that alignment can be a good tool for beginning players to roleplay. But it is only a tool. And it's a tool that can actually put people into more of a box than you would like. And so if you are frustrated with it, Captain Relic, honestly, I would recommend doing away with it in many ways and just kind of going by your own standards, right? And as we know, some of the best villains have, a sympathetic side. And some of the best heroes are anti-heroes, where like, oh, they actually kind of suck in certain ways, but their core standards / what they do to help society is a great thing. So being fluid there and not just sticking to the strict alignments, I actually am a big fan of that. But it can be a helpful tool. Now, to get to the topic that I was inspired by that comment, frustration. Now, have you ever been frustrated by D&D? Captain Relic was talking about being frustrated with Wizards of the Coast and the alignment system, and Honestly, I think people have the right to be frustrated with the things that they are into, right? You can be frustrated with a video game that you're really excited about or that you're playing. That's okay. You can be frustrated that the game of soccer you're playing isn't going as well as you want. The same is true of D&D, where it's like, hey, it is at this end of the day about fun, and it's about having a good time. And if you're frustrated, that's not something to just kind of sit and simmer with. It's something to work through, maybe learn from, maybe change from, even. Um, and I just kind of want to talk about the different things you can be frustrated with, and how to move on from there / adapt. Now, let's say that you're frustrated, like that comment was, in just the whole, all the content that's put out for D&D. Um, if that's the case, the great news is there's a lot of homebrew content. And I say homebrew loosely because on DM's Guild and many other places, there are one shots, there are campaigns, there's whole stories written that are very well thought out, very deep, has a lot of settings, has maps, has everything, right? You can get those, and oftentimes for a better cost. And so if you're frustrated just with the basic content, because I'm with you too, I like official content. I like the Monsters Manual. I like, everything going along with it. I like the new changes they made with the player's guide, with the DM's guide and everything else, right? And but at the same time, there's some different rule sets, or there's some like actual official campaigns and adventures put out that just are too much or too basic or just too complicated. Whatever it is, I've learned to take what I want from it and leave the rest behind and look elsewhere. Because that's a great thing about the internet. There are so many people who are just as frustrated as you, and they've created adventures. They've shared adventures they've run and campaigns, and you can go with that. So if you're upset with the type of content or the amount of content, there's such a backlog of stuff out there. Go to that, and then that kind of takes care of that frustration. Now, what about the mechanics? If you're frustrated with the actual mechanics of D&D 5th edition, and even the newer updates that they've made in the past year, if that's the case, I mean, you can always. Some of my favorite things to do are to look for homebrewed rules. So let's say that you don't like how fall damage is worked out, right? Or swimming, or even encounters to some extent, right? Changing encounters is a big deal, but I think a lot of people have had success with it. Even, and this is not me saying, oh, you need to switch systems, although I will talk more about that later. But we all, maybe not all of us, but some of us know of the example of Pathfinder. That began when D&D kind of took a different route, and the people behind Pathfinder's TTRPG were like, no, we like where it was, where it's more crunchy, it's more in depth, it's got a lot of depth to the combat and the character building and everything like that. So they created a whole new system. And then, so like they kind of went back to what they liked. And you obviously have that option too. If there's a new change and you're like, I like the old way, do it piecemeal, right? Take most of the good stuff that you really like, use the old stuff that was still jiving with you and your group. And Pathfinder, again, when I suspect this had to do a little bit with them not wanting copyright or anything like that, but they did a second edition where they changed up combat in some meaningful ways, where they did a 3-action economy per turn. And it was like, oh, you can do a mix of like movement, spells, actions, whatever, right? And that's something they liked because they wanted options for players. You can do something similar in many ways. You can look up and once again, go to the internet. That's going to be a huge theme here. If you're frustrated with a certain mechanic or even combat, go to the internet, look for homebrewed fixes and rules, and go with that. Honestly, there's a lot out there. A lot of ways people have spiced up combat. They've made crits more interesting. They've made crit fails more interesting. whatever it is, there's some tools that you can find out there for changing the mechanics. And I urge you to look into it, because if you're going to be playing this game for hours and hours, it might as well be as streamlined and fun and, in depth as you and your group would like. Now, in terms of, let's say that I'm going to bring it a little bit more personal here. What if you're frustrated with how a campaign is being run, right? Whether you're a player or a DM. If you're a DM, then honestly, if you're frustrated with how the campaign's going, maybe you had a specific idea in mind and the players are just not playing it at all, right? They're kind of getting distracted. They're doing whatever. Change it up drastically. The next session, they're doing whatever they were doing before, and suddenly they're just kidnapped. They roll, they fail a constitution saving throw because it's really high, and then they're knocked out with knockout gas. And they wake up in the entire new direction that you want. Because at the end, it's like, yeah, players having fun is a key thing, but if you're not having fun, or rather, if you're not interested in where the story's going, then change it. Because players are going to find their fun. Don't worry. They always do. But DMs, it's hard to find your own fun sometimes. And it's absolutely worth ditching the frustration and kind of starting a new campaign within a current campaign. Unless you can think of a less drastic way to do it. But like I really like big swings. I really like big opportunities. And sometimes it's not like, oh, they're taken against their will and like, oh, they're knocked out and they're on a ship and now it's a new adventure. Sometimes it's as simple as like, oh man, I feel like it's a lot of combats. Then guess what? For the next few missions, just do role playing and strategizing and puzzling. And that's it, right? And if there are encounters, make them trap based, or make the enemy more about like, oh, it's about getting to the enemy rather than just this back and forth battle. You have so much flexibility. And so being frustrated as a DM, I bring it up because I think there are a lot of DMs who are secretly frustrated but don't realize it. But you need to realize it, and then you need to act on it, because there's really no excuse. And I don't mean that in a negative way. I mean that you are in charge of the adventure. And that's awesome. It means that you can make changes and you don't have to wait for someone else. You don't have to wait for your players. And along with that, obviously, if it's about like, oh, they're not understanding the adventure, they're not playing well with you, I also always encourage that you have out of session conversations, explaining your frustration or explaining your vision and being like, is this what you're interested in? And then finding some way to compromise / come to an understanding. Now, frustration with the story. Like I mentioned before, I like breaking stereotypes. I like playing into stereotypes sometimes. And as that comment before on Discord showed, a lot of people have frustration with stereotypes because it feels so restrictive. And I think that DMs, maybe just think to yourself, it's like, does the idea of goblins hopping out and attacking your party, does that excite you at all anymore? If it does, great, you're in a good place. If it doesn't, then are you getting tired with just the stereotypical fantasy of it all, right? Do you kind of wish that elves weren't just elves, but they were something else too? Whatever it is, I think that there's a lot of interesting worlds built out there and races and like histories on the internet. And I think that you can find some of those, or even more preferable, just think about what would be interesting to you. Think about movies, TV shows, books, elements that you found interesting in fantastical societies or in story arcs, and try and implement them. Put a twist on it, reskin it, so to speak. But then you don't have to stick with the stereotypes. You don't have to stick with the same, sometimes tired story or story beats or plot points. You can change that. So remember, frustration with where the campaign is an opportunity to change. It's not something to sit in and marinate it and be frustrated with. Now, let's say the big question, what if you're frustrated with D&D? Like just in general, and it's not something you're interested in. Maybe you're like, oh my goodness, this is like so much the same, and I've been doing it for so long. I like tabletop role playing. I like this storytelling element. I like rolling and character building and stuff like that. But like, man, this is my 20th D&D character, or this is the 5th campaign I'm running, and it feels just tired. I'm tired, rather. This happens so much. And as much as we are, a podcast about being a better DM, which is specific to D&D, right? Elsewhere, they often call them GMs. But for a dungeon master, you'd think that I'd be like, hey, stick with D&D, change it up, it'll be okay. And that can work. But I genuinely think going to other systems can add a nice, a splash of cold water, some nice fresh air into your gaming group. And especially if your group has been together for a while, everybody learning a new system or multiple new systems, just trying them out until you find something that's interesting, that can be so good, and it can give you a nice break. And then when you come back to D&D in a year or two or whatever, and you're like, hey, do you guys want to do that again? But I have this cool idea. I think that's exactly what some players are looking for, honestly. And I think that's what you could be looking for sometimes. So once again, D&D is about fun, not frustration. And frustration can manifest itself in annoyance, in feeling stuck. That's a feeling I've felt a lot, right? Where you just feel like, oh, what do I even do? It can manifest in being upset, in not being excited for the session to happen. It can even manifest in terms of like you're hesitant to prep for the session. And so instead of getting angry at yourself, explore those feelings and develop further, explore new things. So that's where I really wanted to leave this off, is just the invitation to explore how you've been feeling about D&D, about encounters, about your interactions with your players, and, kind of like how couples, even if they're doing well, should occasionally do therapy, do some personal introspection and think like, oh, is there something that could be improved? Maybe I'm not noticing it that much, but now that I'm thinking about it, it would be a lot better if blank. If players were more prepared for their turns, if I felt like I had more than just 2 NPC voices, whatever it is, you can actually change it. That's the great thing about D&D. I really think it's a vessel for learning new things, especially as a DM. And so take the opportunity, learn new things, try new things, and until next time, let's roll initiative.
Brought to you by Session Zero Studios. For more information, visit sessionzerostudios.com.